Hello lovelies, today I'm going to talk about 8 tips for creating laser cut art. I've been creating laser cut art now for about 8 months on my own machine. My show in September with mostly laser cut art was extremely successful and I feel really confident in what I'm doing now. So I have 8 different tips that I'm going to share with you today about what I think works to pulling a laser cut piece together. First tip is to keep it original. Now, a lot of laser cut owners are doing generic home decor designs, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with being one of those people. However, if you're trying to be a fine artist, you need to separate yourself out from the generic home decor scene. Something I've also seen is that creators who are interested in making money off their machines will create 2 separate stores. They'll actually have an Etsy store that's just for their home decor, and then they'll have a separate Etsy store for their fine art. For me, I have absolutely no desire to create or do anything generic home decor-y. It's not my style, it's not what I'm into, and so I try very hard to make sure that a majority of my designs do not fall into this category. When you're looking to get into fine art, it is really important to keep it original. When it comes to laser cutting, there is a lot of SVG files that you can buy that are other people's designs. I don't recommend doing this if you're looking to get into laser cut fine art. You're going to need to develop your own SVG files, your own design files, because that is what's going to make you stand apart. When it comes to creating your piece in Illustrator or whatever program you're using, think about what layers you're going to use. How many layers? How thick are those layers? How are they going to fit together? For me, I predominantly use Baltic birch for a majority of my pieces. They accept the watercolors really well and they're easy to work with and glue together. And a lot of the pieces, I just have to think about where things are overlapping and how much space there is to glue those 2 pieces together. But play around with layering. It's really fun. You can make pieces that are self-contained, like a square piece or this skull piece, for example, where the layers create a very thick outer shape. Or you can do something like this owl piece where the layers are built up with negative space in between, which is tip number 3. Definitely think about using negative space to your advantage. I think that this hasn't really been explored fully when it comes to laser art, at least not what I have seen personally. A lot of laser cut artists that I've seen so far really like the self-contained shape that you can create, the box forms or the thicker forms, and they don't play around with leaving negative space in between the layers. I think this can be a lot of fun to play with. Some of the pieces, like this horizontal landscape piece that I have, look like they are floating off the wall because the layers behind them are smaller in the back and they're larger in the front. And so you get this really interesting floating shadow effect when I cast lights on it, and that's going to create a really interesting piece that interacts with the environment that it's in and the lighting that it's in, and that can be a lot of fun to play with. Going back to this owl piece, the triangles and the diamonds and the circles all created really cool shadows. And another example is this heron piece that I created, where you actually get these really interesting shadows and the wall actually shows through the piece. And since I kept the color palette really monochromatic, it can go in any single room and match the decor because whatever your wall color is will show through the piece and interact with that piece. So don't forget to think about negative space when you're building your creations. Something that fits very well for my style, it may not work for you, but what I really like to play with is nestled details. So for example, on this owl piece, I took the underlayer and I painted metallic watercolors on it, and then had the little piece that fits over it and has the little holes for the feathers. So when you move the piece in the light or when you're stepping or walking by it, you catch tiny little glimmer of metallics down in the holes, and it catches your eye, and it adds an extra layer of depth to the piece. And I love playing with little tiny nestled details that you may not notice right away, but if you sit and you stare at the piece, they're rewards for really taking time to look at what the piece is. Tip number 5 may seem kind of obvious, but this has taken a lot in trial and error for me over the last few months, and that is holding it all together. So no matter what your material is, you're going to have many different options for holding it together. E6000 is always a reliable one, but for me in particular, I am using this wood glue. And I'm using the premium version of that to hold everything together. So far, this has been the best option. I have tried Gorilla Glue. I've tried other couple brands. I've tried spray glues, which make things a lot easier and faster, but they just don't hold up as well as this glue does. I will say that this glue does not dry 100% clear. It does stain the wood, so you do have to be careful when it's wet to try to catch all the little bubbles or spots where it may drip out. Next tip, with any fine art piece, you do have to consider the color palettes. What type of medium are you going to use? If you're creating a laser cut piece out of wood, you have a lot of options. There's watercolors, gouache, acrylic, paint pens, ink. There's just a huge variety of materials and mediums that you can use. For me personally, I love experimenting with watercolors. I love blending colors together, but I do keep in mind that painting on wood is not like painting on paper. I go through a lot more watercolor pigment than I would if I was just painting on paper, because the wood absorbs the pigment like crazy. You have to get used to using a lot more water and a lot more pigment when you're painting on wood. Number 7, don't be afraid to play around with moving parts. For me, that was kind of intimidating to think about at first, but after I got a couple of custom commission orders that requested moving parts, I started playing around and found that it actually wasn't all of that more complicated. You just have to think about how the pieces are going to fit together and how they're going to move, and play around with different ideas and techniques to try to figure out what's going to work best for your piece. For this wolf piece, as an example, I purchased wooden dowels and then just made sure that the laser cut hole in the middle piece was big enough for the dowel to fit through. And then I did have to hand carve 2 little divots into the 2 other outer pieces so that the dowel would fit in and could be glued to the 2 outer pieces while the middle piece stays free. This took a little bit of testing to get right, because sometimes the middle piece will get too much glue on it and then it'll glue together, and that is really frustrating and ruins the whole thing. So it does take a little bit of practice, but it's been so much fun working with moving parts, and I'm going to continue to explore this in the future. There's also really simple things that you can do to make a piece interactive, like just buying dollhouse hinges or little mini hinges, jewelry box hinges that allow you to create moving pieces with metal parts and experiment with using different materials. These hummingbirds were really fun to create. If you want to catch that DIY, I'll link it in the description box below and in the eye above. Lastly, again, something that may seem kind of obvious, but that takes a little playing around with, is sealing for protection. And that is going to be a personal preference what you choose. Obviously, I recommend you should choose something that is archival to protect your works for hundreds and hundreds of years, even after you are long gone, especially if you want to be a fine artist. Personally, I use a lacquer, which is not the best product when it comes to being archival. However, it doesn't interact with my colors. It creates a really nice glossy finish that I enjoy, and it's kind of like a happy medium for me. Something that's a little bit of a better material is using a polyurethane, but for me personally, it changes the colors of the watercolor and it ruins the piece for me. Usually it makes it too yellow or kind of grainy. I just don't particularly like the polyurethane and how it looks on the wood, but that's just, again, a personal preference. There is also resin that you can play with, although I find resin to be a little too tricky for my taste, and I don't particularly like doing that whole process. A lot of people have really created some absolutely stunning wood pieces that they then covered in resin, and it just creates this extra layer of depth to the piece. So it's definitely something to consider and look into. It's just not for me personally. So that's it. That's my 8 tips for creating laser cut art. As always, please do leave any questions you have in the description box below. I try to respond to everybody as much as I can, and I appreciate everyone's comments. I really, really do. I appreciate likes. I appreciate comments. I appreciate feedback if you have any, and I would love to hear from you if you have any tips. If you're already a laser cut artist, I'd love to hear your feedback and what you think and what's your favorite part of working with the medium. So please do let me know in the comment box below what you think. I would appreciate it if you considered subscribing. It helps me to keep making more videos on a consistent basis, the more subscribers that I have, so I really, really, really do appreciate it. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, remember to create, love, and travel on. Bye!